I'm about to show you the Ontario provincial polling projections, and then I'm going to say something that you might think is quite absurd. But here are what the current numbers in Ontario look like according to 338 Canada when it comes to popular vote and seat projections. 338 Canada is projecting that on average between all the polls, the Ontario PC party would get 42%, Liberals 26 with their weird target looking logo, the NDP would get 21, the Greens would get 7, and of course, there would be other parties also getting votes. They show the PCs would get 88 seats, the NDP 20, Liberals 13, Greens 2, and then, of course, we have Bobby Ann Brady being able to hold on to her one independent seat around the area that actually Leslie Lewis is the federal MP. It's that kind of same Haldimand Norfolk area. But I'm about to say, Doug Ford is actually in serious trouble in this provincial election, and he deserves to be in serious trouble. The man is holding a provincial election a year and a half early for basically no reason because he knows as soon as Pierre Poilievre becomes the Prime Minister of Canada, the standards for what a conservative should be are going to go up, and he is going to look like a complete hack. In fact, Doug Ford, in calling this election early, has just given the Bloc Québécois and the NDP especially a great excuse not to have a federal election until October. Jagmeet Singh was on the hook to try and call an early election because he had promised to as soon as Parliament was back in session, and he's been given a little bit of a reprieve because of the Liberal leadership race. Maybe he can give Carney or Freeland or whoever becomes the new Liberal leader a couple of weeks to get their foothold or get their bearings, and then he can call an election. But now that Doug Ford is calling an Ontario election, guess what Jagmeet Singh can say? Oh, there's voter fatigue. 40% of the population of Canada just went through an election like a week ago. So we got to wait a few more months. Our staffers in Ontario are exhausted because they were helping on Merritt Styles' NDP campaign. That's what Jagmeet Singh can now do because Doug Ford wants an election. Why? Because Trump or something. Literally for no reason. The real reason is because he's not a conservative and he wants his election in before Poilievre is in, so people don't compare him to a man who's actually cutting taxes and spending and standing up against DEI and gender theory, because Doug Ford stands up against none of that. He has extremely high taxes, high regulations. He runs a subsidy economy where he subsidizes the same projects that the federal Liberals do. They literally funded the cricket factory alongside the Trudeau Liberals. They celebrated it opening. But even though the projections currently look like this and Ford looks unbeatable, the problem is that by having this early election, Doug Ford is suffering from the same problem that Justin Trudeau did in 2021. You would be considered insane to think at the start of the 2021 federal election that there was a chance for Justin Trudeau to lose. He was polling like 8-10 points above Aaron O'Toole, and Aaron O'Toole was a terrible conservative leader. The problem is people resent you holding an election that you didn't need to hold. Trudeau had only been in like 2 years into his second term and then wanted another election because he thought that COVID was boosting his popularity enough to win back his majority. He won a few more seats back, but basically nothing changed. And this is the current Main Street poll. I criticize their federal polling in here because I think that mixing federal polling into provincial polling doesn't really work. It throws off the results a bit. But this is what their federal poll showed, and this is also what Liaison Strategies and other ones are showing. Yes, campaign research is showing that the PCs could win 100 seats. They could win even more seats than 338 is projecting. The problem is campaign research is run by Nick Kouvalis, who is the personal pollster for Doug Ford. Of course, he is going to put out numbers that try and basically intimidate all other opponents from even competing, and just don't spend your money on this election because we're going to win anyways. So I wouldn't trust Nick Kouvalis as far as I can throw him. But the current projections with undecideds added in show the Ford PCs getting 31% of the vote, 24% going a Liberal, 20% going for the NDP. You have 5% for the Greens. They're probably only going to be able to hold on to the 2 seats they currently have. And then other is 6%, which would include the New Blue Party. Guys, if you live in Ontario, consider voting for the New Blue Party. It's an actual conservative party, and it's not like a purity testing party where Ford didn't do everything perfectly, ergo you should vote for us. They basically are saying Ford didn't achieve anything he promised in the 2018 platform, ergo we are starting to try and achieve what the PC party originally promised. So check out the new Blue Party website. I linked it in the description below and pinned it to the top of the comments. Consider running for them if they don't have a candidate in your area. Great election experience. But this poll does show that a lot of the undecideds might be leaning PC, which is good for the Ontario PCs. They go from having 31% support up to having 34%. The Liberals gain a little bit. Yes, the Ontario PCs might even be able to win a majority with a lot of vote splitting between the NDP and the Liberals. I'm going to go down just to removing all undecideds. The last one was with leaning voters added in, where would people who, if you twisted their arm, who would they vote for? They would move over to the Conservatives. The Conservatives only have a 7% lead in this poll. That is not very good, because this is where I don't believe campaign research at all when they show the PCs having a 20-point lead. This is Doug Ford. This is not Pierre Poilievre in Ontario. Pierre Poilievre is popular. He has a net approval rate. He has a net high, like a net positive approval rating across Canada. Maybe it's net negative in Ontario by a bit because Toronto's there, and you get a lot of metropolitan Liberals who hate Poilievre, and they will always say that they hate his guts, which hurts his ability to be popular. It's not like Alberta, but Doug Ford has a terrible approval rating in Ontario because he's not very conservative. So the conservative base doesn't know what to think about him. The federal conservatives really don't like him because he's been propping up the Liberals. Again, Chrystia Freeland calls Doug Ford her therapist, and she refers to Chrystia Freeland as one of his good friends because he's liberal. He likes retail politics. The way that Doug Ford does politics is he takes taxpayer money and he gives it to specific industries and invests in specific regions where he wants to win votes. Northern Ontario couldn't care less because he assumes he's just going to win those ridings. He couldn't care less about a lot of regions where he assumes that people won't stop voting PC, and then he just dumps money into swing ridings where it would be tight with the NDP or the Liberals to try and win people over because, hey, if we're not in, you might not get those car subsidies, you might not get those EV subsidies, even though they're effectively fake jobs. They're private sector, but they're basically public sector because the only reason those car companies, those EV factories are even there is because both Ford and the federal Liberals are funding them to be there. It's completely ridiculous. So, and this is not even just the worst of it. Yes, Ford is only at 36%. The Liberals are at 29%. Again, I don't trust campaign research showing that the Liberals are doing as bad as they were with Stephen Del Duca. Stephen Del Duca was a horrible leader, like one of the worst party leaders I've ever seen in Canadian politics from my time following it. And I'm thinking even before I was born, I look back at elections back then. He's like Michael Ignatieff in terms of bad for the Liberal Party of Ontario. Bonnie Crombie actually has a brand. Bad politician, but she's bad in the same ways Doug Ford is bad. So how do you really even grade them? Plus, she hasn't been the premier becoming unpopular since 2018 the way Doug Ford has. Legitimately, this is why I tell people to vote New Blue. I cannot tell you a major difference in policy between Bonnie Crombie and Doug Ford. It's impossible. Both of them are big government politicians. Both of them are in favor of DEI. The Ford government just rolled out new DEI initiatives. They have not reformed the crazy curriculum, the sex ed curriculum in Ontario that they promised to do in 2018, because that was controversial. Both parties are like that. Both of them are supposedly against the carbon tax, but are big fans of the industrial carbon tax. It's so weird looking at Ontario politics right now. Here is the current approval ratings for Doug Ford, according to Main Street Research. I want to move on to liaison strategies a bit later. But 18% are strongly in favor of them. That's not too bad. 25% somewhat. But then the deeply unfavorable is 31%, and somewhat unfavorable is 17%. Maybe this is still a winning coalition since he has technically above 40% in terms of approval. But the problem is that there's a lot of people in the somewhat favorable who are not going to show up because the election was held early and they didn't want this election. Bonnie Crombie, in fact, has generally better approval ratings. It's not great, but people don't hate her in the same way. Here is your opposition. because your opposition wants you to get out of office, where your own voters are like, we already have the majority. Why are we having an early election? This doesn't make sense at all. But yes, and you can even tell that there's a lot of undecided people with this. But yeah, I guess some people in his base will say that this is a good thing or whatever, but I don't really see this as being something that's going to help Ford out. You're going to get a lot of ticked off people because here's the thing. I'm going to show you the poll results, the detailed results here. These are the breakdown of people who think it's a good idea. Obviously, now that Ford has made it clear he's holding the new election, there are going to be PC voters saying, oh, of course that's a good idea. That's that's 60% or so, but somewhat opposed is 12.6, strongly opposed is 10.6 in his base. And then the other parties, the strongly support to strongly oppose, are all still anti-Ford voters. So if anything, Ford has just taken a third of his own party and ticks them off hard. People who didn't want an election at all, who probably already only somewhat like him. This is not very good at all. This is bad politics. It's what people used to do in like the 90s when you could kind of get away with it. Jean Chrétien would always hold early elections when it advantaged him. But I think, again, Justin Trudeau in 2021 has proven that this doesn't really work anymore. This is what the overall polling looks like. You can tell it's kind of all over the place at the moment. I'm just going to bring it up on screen from 338. So it really is, do you trust liaison strategies in Main Street, or do you trust Leger and campaign research? Leger, that's a good result for them, 24%. Generally, Leger is pretty good. Campaign research, I wouldn't trust more than farther than I can throw Nick Kouvalis, which is not very far. Yeah, it's just not very good looking poll results. I'm going to bring up specifically what liaison strategies had, because the thing is that they show a consistent downgrade. It's not like liaison has been trying to mess with Ford and try and show that he's deeply unpopular, and they've been doing this for a long time. They had him back in January of 2025, early January, at 41%. January 8th and 9th, rumors of an early election start swirling. The Liberals tick up a bit, Conservatives tick down a bit. January 15th to the 16th, Liberals tick up a bit, Conservatives tick up a bit. But then when it becomes clear a new election's coming, jumps down from 41 to 39, and the Liberals are at 33. Merritt Stiles and the NDP are absolutely crashing and burning right now because nobody cares who Merritt Stiles is. She is basically discount Andrea Horwath, and even Andrea Horwath, by the end of her tenure as NDP Ontario leader, was a discount version of Andrea Horwath. But yeah, I could see this being an election where Ford may just keep stomping around Ontario like he's Godzilla and win 100 seats despite the fact that a lot of people don't like him. Also, this could be an election where people are like, yeah, this was a little bit too cute by half, Doug. We're not voting for you. We're not showing up. It's a low turnout election where he just loses a bunch of GTA seats. He loses any seats he has in like the Hamilton, Mississauga area because voters were just ticked off, especially like ethnic community voters are just going to be ticked off that Doug Ford is calling an early election, because elections can be pretty exhausting in those areas where community leaders are like trying to force you out to vote. I could see this just like backfiring on the Ford government really, really hard. And frankly, they deserve it. They're not conservative at all. And now they're taking the goodwill they do not have to have a year and a half early election, which is going to be delaying the federal election, because Singh can say, oh, all my staffers who are helping Merritt Stiles are exhausted. Ontario voters have voter fatigue right now. We need to wait a while. Annoying. Anyways, so that's it for me today, guys. If you're in Ontario, guys, again, check out the New Blue Party. It's a very sensible conservative party. If you're a federal conservative, basically New Blue Party is like the federal conservatives in Ontario. The federal conservatives hate Doug Ford for a reason. He screwed them over in 2021. He has not been helpful since then. In fact, he keeps bear hugging Justin Trudeau and congratulating the Liberals on how great they've been for Ontario workers because they've been subsidizing all these stupid fake jobs. They're awful. Check out the New Blue Party. Consider running for them if they don't have a candidate in their area. I'm going to try and fly out in Ontario to help the New Blue Party. really great people. They have EDAs in every single riding. Do not vote for the Ontario Party. It's a fake party that I know from my experience is basically funded by PC insiders to confuse the third party scene, because Ontario Party didn't even post anything on social media like I think it was like late 2023. Last time they had posted anything on social media was like September of 2023. And then suddenly there's a new election. They've popped back up to say, hey, we're the anti-Ford people. Even though in the 22 provincial election, they literally never criticized Doug Ford once. They never did, because all they were meant to do was hold down the New Blue Party and prevent them from getting support. I know this because I was involved in negotiations back in late 2021 between Ontario Party and New Blue. Ontario Party, despite the fact they keep putting out rhetoric about how New Blue and them should combine, did not want to combine. They wanted a party where then their leader, Derek Sloan, got to be the leader of the combined party. It was ridiculous. They were disorganized. They, at some point after the 22 election, got deregistered because they didn't even do their financial filings in time, and then took them like another year to finally do it, because they're not real at all. They don't have EDAs anywhere. They might have like 5, but it's not a party that has a constitution. It's not a party with voting rights. It's like the PPC that is just whatever the leader wants to do. Ontario Party the New Blue Party of Ontario actually has policy conventions. They actually pass policies. I've heard people go to them and they say, yeah, some of the stuff I wanted passed, some of it didn't, but it was completely fair and I got people's arguments. It's an actual party like the Reform Party was back in 1988. They, in fact, did better than the Reform Party did in their first election, despite the fact they had to also compete against the Populist Party of Ontario, the Libertarians, and Ontario Party. They got 2.7% of the vote. Reform only got like 2.1 in its first election in 1988. Anyways, so that should be it for me today, guys. Again, subscribe to the channel, like this video, do all that great stuff, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys later.